Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video. Today, we start the regular round of prediction videos for the 2026 and 2025, albeit very few elections. This is actually the first prediction I will be doing post this. The Wisconsin spring election results. I'll go into my takeaways from here. Summarize. I made an entire video on it. If you want to watch that. Plus, this is a little bit more new information in case you've already watched it. You can still skip ahead, but updated thoughts a little bit afterwards. But I am doing the. I don't know if that glitched on screen for you guys. Okay, my computer is schizophrenic, but I will be doing the Senate election prediction today. Remember, this is April 2025. So if you want to come back i- in November 2026 and say, "Oh, you were wrong. You were wrong." 1.5 year over 1.5 years out because the spring election results aren't exactly in line with it. If you wanted it to be 6 months off the general election, it should be May. But I honestly don't know why it's not May. That would have been really cool to have the UK local election results at the same time as the Wisconsin Supreme Court results. Oh, I'm giddy thinking about it. Um, I'm kidding because it wouldn't have been May 1st, but I don't know why, but if you want to come in a year and 7 months and say, "Oh, you were wrong about the prediction," whoa, you want to let's do a little game. Um, so for the 2024 Senate, which was Senate Class One, you want to see people's predictions this far out? Something like this was their predictions. Like, I'm not even kidding. West Virginia was like likely. Indiana, Missouri was likely. Nebraska was safe. Both seats. Actually, I don't even think there was a special election up in Nebraska yet. Um, Texas and Florida were maybe likely. Texas probably a lead margin. Arizona was a tilt margin because we didn't know Carrie Lake was going to be the nominee. Nevada, honestly, around lean. Um, and then something like this. If you want to count the fucking indies up here, as independents rather than Democrats, you're all good. But this is a 50-50 Senate election result, which a little bit off the final results. I will say. And one thing is interesting, and this is in case you ever wonder where my name comes from. It's this time when people are having Montana as lean Democrat, tilt Democrat, likely Democrat for Senate. I put my foot down. I say no. This is retarded. What are you smoking? Um, it's actually really March, April. I mean, I have some messages from some people on Discord, named GreenCat9013, from like April, where he's still maintaining April 2024, where he's still maintaining that Tester is going to win because one poll showed him up. So that's the backstory in case people are like, oh, he's like, I've had this one guy, um, tried to call me out for getting Washington's third wrong in 2024 when he had Kamala Harris winning 303 electoral votes. Probably don't know who he is, and he's relevant enough that I won't say his name. But he's calling me out, and he's like, "Oh, he's an egotist because he got one prediction that everyone thought right." Like, no, you fucking idiot! You would have had it as likely Democrat had you been around back then. And yes, I'm an egotist because I'm the greatest person on this planet. Anyways, breathe in, breathe in, meditate, meditate. Let the hate flow through you. I like to think that people can see through that as a thinly veiled joke. But anyways, we get into these Senate predictions. We have 53-47 Senate, which means that 13 Democrat seats are up and 22 Republican seats are up, but a lot of them are safe. It's like this cope on the 2024 Senate map that like, oh, Democrats are in a bad map because they have more seats up. Like, okay, if there's 3 Senate seats up, one is in California, one is in Washington, and the other is in Minnesota, and Republicans have an incumbent in Minnesota, Democrats have Washington and California. Well, more Democrat seats are up, it's bad for them. It's the same thing. We go by incumbents. Um, the Senate looks like this. It's not as much of a bad scenario for Democrats or really either party. Um, as the 2024 elections, where I mean, Democrats had incumbents in Montana and Ohio was pretty bad. But I will say the states that were under 10 in the presidential election, um, and obviously crossover seats like Maine, which besides from Michigan and Georgia, which were swing states, that's actually the only non-competitive, like non-swing state seat to have a crossover senator left um, in the entire country, which is kind of weird unless you count the independents in Vermont and Maine. But states that are under 10 presidentially, uh, these are the states that were under 10 presidentially. If you include states that were nearly there, I suppose you could make this the map. Um, but it still poses a pretty daunting task for Democrats. Even getting to 49. Oh, I put Oregon as safe Republican. Yeah, my bad. Even getting to 50 seats, never mind 49 or 48, is a pretty daunting task for them. And regaining the Senate majority means they'll have to flip two states that were over Trump plus 10. And if they lose one of Iowa and Ohio, you have to move on to Florida and Texas, which were nearly Trump plus 15. So it's a pretty bad map for them. But without further ado, we'll get into the prediction. So Republicans probably sweep most of the plain states. Nebraska, it looks like Dan Osborne's more inclined to run for Congress. Even if he runs for Senate, it depends on Ricketts. I initially, when I heard he was filing for Senate in 2024, thought that Ricketts would be the weaker nominee to beat, especially since he was appointed. But he was reelected and reelected quite overwhelmingly. Um, Part of that was yes, people didn't focus on it, but like he outran the top of the ticket by a lot. Lancaster was a 1 point margin. Douglas was a 6 point margin. Keep those in mind. Lancaster was a 4 point margin. Douglas was a 10 point margin. So he's a pretty consistent overperformer. Um, his Democratic opponent got 2% less than Kamala Harris, which is quite the feat. And when they were the only two people on the ballot and didn't get anywhere close to Dan Osborne. So Dan Osborne is a unique candidate, but also Pete Ricketts is a pretty strong candidate. So even if he runs, it really depends on a total turnout. But I do think that Dan Osborne wouldn't be in the best position there. Part of his appeal in 2024 was Deb Fischer had broken her promise to only serve 2 terms. She had really never run a hard fought campaign in her life, and she completely floundered. I'd say the majority of safe seat Republicans wouldn't end up doing that. Or, like, if you ran an independent against, like, a Mississippi Republican, like, I think both of them would be pretty competent in handling that campaign. I just think that Deb Fischer was partially, Democrats dumped a bunch of money into that seat because there was really no other pickup opportunities for them besides for Texas and Florida, which went swimmingly for them. And it was seen as like their only pickup opportunity, which it really was. Um, unless you count Arizona. So good job on that. Um, congrats. But I really don't think that Osborne gets any of the special circumstances that he got in 2024. And being a perennial candidate really isn't the best look. That the DNC drags you out whenever they need someone to run for Senate. I also think that Roger Marshall, which I actually don't have a tab up on the 2020 Senate races, but he massively underperformed in his Senate race. I think I I just unless Laura Kelly runs against him, I just don't really see any reason he'd underperform by so much. He's an incumbent now. He's relatively right wing, but he's within the mainstream of a state like Kansas. I I think I mean it might be a bit of a hot take, but I think he wins by like a little bit over 10, like 11%. I forgot Montana. Montana, unless they drag out John Tester again, uh, Republicans are going to win that easily. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. I saw someone saying that Jeff Landry would lose re-election if everyone turned out. You know what? I agree with that statement. So I'm putting Louisiana Sun a safe Democrat. No, I'm kidding. I think Cassidy probably gets primaried. Actually, talking about primary challengers, I think Louisiana, Texas probably will have new senators, who are Republicans because they primary out the incumbents. But yeah, John Cornyn being down 30 in polls against someone who hasn't announced and probably gets the Trump endorsement isn't the best thing. For him, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, even though Democrats supposedly are running a good candidate there. Um, yeah, I think I've heard that before. Amy McGrath wants to say hello. West Virginia, South Carolina, with the Trump endorsement for Lindsey Graham. Hashtag killing myself. And I think Florida, Moody's a pretty decent nominee and should hold up relatively well in a general election. She overperformed a lot as Attorney General. And it's not really that competitive of a state. I mean, you can be like, oh my god, the Florida specials. Wow. Florida specials. Where have I heard that before? Oh guys, look at my irrelevant special election that will totally indicate how an election will go. And this was during June where this district was significantly closer. It was not during April of the year before. So I don't know if that's going to be too indicative. It'll also turn out with shit here. So that is something to keep, and Republicans were outspent. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, yeah, I don't think Florida is going to be too competitive. Ohio also, Republicans have the incumbent John Husted. I think he should hold. Democrats really don't have too much of a bench in Ohio. I mean, obviously, Democrats will dream about like, oh, Tim Ryan and Sherrod Brown could run. One, if they're going to run for governor, and two, it's just pick name who did well in Senate election and run them again. Like, no Democrat has won statewide in Ohio in what 7 years now. Like Jesus Christ, I think they knocked off an incumbent for Supreme Court in 2020, but if I'm not mistaken, that was a nonpartisan race. And also, if I'm not mistaken, those same justices were up. Or they were actually up in 2026, if I'm correct. But some other justices were up this time. And they were all crucified. So yeah, I don't think that I don't think it's going to go too well in Ohio for Democrats. And the final safe Republican state, Alaska. Alaska was somewhat lopsided in 2024. Even knocked off the House Representative Mary Peltola, who's like the only Democrat who's ever done well statewide in Alaska in the last 10 years. So, besides for 2018 governor, which also was bit of an asterisk. But we're getting to governors, I think, tomorrow, so we'll save that discussion for then. But if Mary Peltola lost re-election in 2024 when she really wasn't expected to lose re-election in this race, besides for some RNC internals, wasn't expected to be close whatsoever. Um, I don't think that someone, especially who isn't named Mary Peltola, because she either runs for House or runs for governor. There's really no one who saying that she runs for Senate. And rather than being an incumbent, she'll be running against a fairly popular, strong incumbent who, by the way, you want to talk about independents running for Senate? Democrats ran an independent against him, and he outperformed Trump in 2020. So I'd say Sullivan probably holds on. He's relatively popular, should do good in the suburban areas, which is really all you need in Alaska. The rural areas aren't enough to overwhelm the heavily Republican suburban areas. It's a weird state where rural areas vote Democrat. So, even though I do think the GOP could be slipping a bit long term, especially if those suburban areas do continue to slowly erode for the GOP, I think Sullivan holds quite easily. So, I'd say that's it for the safe Republican states. Then safe Democrat, Oregon. Illinois, Durbin's high up in leadership, and has some crossover appeal. That's why I'm going to ignore the uh, very narrow for Illinois result in 2024 and say that he probably ends up holding on by 10% or more. I'd say 15 to 16%, even if they force him out, unless they run Brandon Johnson. A decent Democrat wave should carry him to reelection. Colorado also, um, another safe Harris state, unless Republicans outperform Trump in a midterm, which, I mean, it's happened before, but like, it took 9/11 for that to happen. I think that's a bit out of reach. Um, though the way that some Democrats are acting, perhaps. But I really I don't think it's going to be too competitive. It does look like Bennett, which I think it's Hickenlooper up this time, if I'm not mistaken. But it does look like Bennett may resign so he can run for governor. So we might have a special election out of Colorado, which would make three special elections, which is kind of insane. Um, But even if that's up, it's not going to be too competitive. Colorado really isn't a competitive state anymore. Um, and alongside the coast, Delaware, I think this is Carper, if I'm not mistaken, who's a relatively strong candidate. I think he should hold quite easily. Um, Rhode Island, I think this is White Sox. No, not White House. It's a White House, if I'm not mistaken. Um, because this was White Sides. No, that was White House. Maybe there's. I think it's White Sides. Um, who's the other senator from Rhode Island? Though I'm not sure. Kind of irrelevant. Jack Reed, not White Side. I don't know where the hell I'm getting. I think I'm White Sides. He's the guy who defeated Garcia, right? Yeah, that's what I'm getting it from. But we have Jack Reed up. He really shouldn't face too much of a struggle being reelected. Ed Markey might lose in the primary. That was actually quite close in 2020, but other than that, shouldn't have too much trouble. So this is the competitive map, and you can already see I'm being somewhat generous to Democrats. I am taking this into account somewhat. I've done some looking at this, and one turnout was pretty incredible for Democrats in areas like Dane, Milwaukee. I've heard from some people who I don't fully trust that actually, and even Waukesha, the election day was a Democrat, or at least Democrat by or Democrat in the Supreme Court race. Probably still a Trump electorate. And even though it was a 10-point margin statewide, that was buoyed by the fact that this was a Harris plus 8 electorate. So Schimmel, under those circumstances, did okay, though I did think he might have overperformed. Um, but this is also, even though New York Times shows it as a partisan race, it is also a Supreme Court race. You can see because of these coalitions, the county that swung the most was Lafayette, which is a pretty heavily Trump county. Like, it even voted for Hovde overwhelmingly, so that's the type of county you're talking about. But it voted for Hovde by much less than the presidential margin. There's a large amount of split ticketing here. Um, it's still kind of insane. He did pretty good in the Driftless area for what it's worth. But yeah, I think this is also less a referendum on Trump at this point and more a referendum on Elon Musk, who should be stepping aside from the administration, which I 100% support. Elon Musk is one of the most hated men in America, and having him continue to serve at the forefront of this administration and campaign for these candidates will lead to more results like this. But well, I would read into it a little bit, and it is a sign of caution for Trump. I still don't think it's the end all be all, but it is why I'm being a little bit more cautious for Republicans in the Senate map and saying like a D plus two, maybe D plus three environment is around what I'm thinking for 2026. We do have to see. Um, Many of the polls that showed Susan Crawford winning and Crawford winning by quite a bit also showed Republicans being up in the 2026 generic ballot in Wisconsin. I'm inclined to believe that's just because it's early. Um, but, it's a bad night for Republicans. It's a very big loss, but it's not the end all be all. So, what can you do? We lost a Supreme Court seat. See you guys in 2026 for the next one. Oh God, it's gonna be election after election. We have Supreme Court races until 2030. But anyways, for the likely Republican states, the first one is Iowa. Um, Iowa's a pretty heavily Trump state. Insert and seltzer joke, but this is a Trump state, but some Republicans have underperformed. In 2024, it was of course Miller Meeks. What the fuck is this result? You lost Jefferson, which was a Trump 2020 county. What? This was like a Trump plus 4 district in 2020. Probably like Trump plus 11 this time around. Um but she's completely unlikable. I wouldn't say that the other Iowa senator whose name escapes me um at this point. Why am I this stupid? Um She's the woman who's not named Chuck Grassley, but she's not the most popular. She did underrun Trump significantly, though that was with massive Democrat spending for her opponent in 2020. But there are some signs of caution, especially without Kim Reynolds being that popular. Um, there are some warning signs for Republicans in the Iowa Senate race. So I do think probably when it's all said and done, Republicans win this race by 8 to 9%, which would actually be improvements from 2020, which is around what I'm saying in the popular vote. Um, Still is a pretty heavily Trump state, and as much as you could read this into it, and I did say kind of read into this, I'm reading into it a little bit. Um, Once again, you really can't extrapolate the margin from Wisconsin to Iowa. But I will say, if Democrats are winning Wisconsin by 10, this race could get pretty close. I'm just going to wager that they probably don't win a Trump state by 10%. So move on to Texas. Um, this one we could have talked about, and I'm assuming that it's kind of resigned to an inevitability that Cornyn ends up primaried by Paxton. The base seems to be heavily on Paxton's side, and Paxton's heading towards a run quite a bit. He and Cornyn really do not like each other, especially without Trump even trying to nominate him for Attorney General. I think it's been in the works behind the scenes from now. We had some confirmation on that, though it's a bit wishy washy. But I do think Paxton wins the primary, and probably wins the general. This is a right trending state, pretty solidly Republican. Obviously at the border, but like I said, once the big suburban backlash to Trump from 2020 dissipated, you would see these Latino trends in these suburban counties and in these urban counties coming back and bite Democrats in the ass. What happened? Suburban hatred of Donald Trump mostly stagnated, and the Latinos came back to bite Democrats on the ass. Now, I will say, the precincts do reveal that, for the most part, the suburban areas of Tarrant and Dallas didn't shift to that Republican. They mostly shifted neutral, but the city areas, Dallas City, of course, and Fort Worth and Tarrant, shifted heavily Republican, narrowing the Democratic margin there was big. And even if Paxton does lose a little bit of support from Trump in the suburbs, he's not that great of a candidate. At some point, like, unless he insults Latinos, which people have it in their head that like supporting closing the border is like giving the finger to Latinos. That's what they want. Like that's why they shifted so heavily to Trump. So I think that Paxton probably. I mean, he probably doesn't win like Webb, Hidalgo, because these are more Trump trends. We'd have to see though. Potentially, these counties could be closer, and he could win like a Maverick, a Zapata, a Star. Those were all Cruz counties, but I really don't think it'll be too competitive with Paxton as the Senate nominee, like R plus 8 or so. Um, further notice. I can't speak, people. My voice, it's betraying me. But let's get Democrats above the threshold where they can block a filibuster. By adding New Mexico to their repertoire. Um, I think Ben Ray Lujan, um, if I'm not mistaken, is the weaker Senate incumbent. Which you know, even though it's going to be a bluer year, Domenech wasn't a great candidate. She was running behind Trump in most polls, and Heinrich was a pretty good nominee. Um, I think that potentially you could see some of these Latino trends start to speed up on the down ballot, and Republicans also potentially do a little bit better in these suburbs. Domenici really didn't outperform Trump too much there, which was her only appeal as a candidate. So great job on that one. But I do think that potentially Republicans could get this close, but I'd say for now, around D+9 or so, kind of where the national shift is. It's just I'm not quite ready to put it as safe Democrat when 2020 Democrats did not do good in the Senate election. Though of course that was Ron Ketty as the nominee. So take it with a grain of salt. Now to Minnesota, this race seemed competitive a little bit um at the beginning. Um Tina Smith wasn't the strongest candidate, but even her retiring did hurt Democrats, and Democrats really didn't do that great in Minnesota here in 2024. Tim Walz being on the ticket probably saved Harris in the state. Otherwise, the state would have been down the wire. Klobuchar won. I mean, she's Amy Klobuchar, but the fact that a lot of these rural areas that supported her overwhelmingly in all of her previous bids for Minnesota office went against her, and her coalition shifted to a much more suburban, much more average Democrat coalition, especially with Royce White being the nominee, probably helping her a little bit. It's not exactly a great sign for Minnesota Democrats, and the bigger thing is the state house kind of flipped. It tied, and the state senate nearly flipped. This was not a competitive state senate election, yet it was. Um, in spite of what everyone thought, Democrats nearly lost this state senate special election, which would have delivered the chamber to Republicans. Um, but that's quite the indictment on Walz. I do think that Democrats end up winning it by a likely margin, just because one, it seems like Peggy Flanagan probably is a weak nominee, but the other potential nominee, the House Representative Angie Craig, pretty strong nominee. Um, this was like a Harris +5 or Harris +6 district, but she did do pretty good. Scott County, that's the entirety of Scott County. It was Tyrab, or the fuck you pronounce his name, by .5. That was also a Trump +8 county, so she's a pretty big overperformer. She's the Senate nominee. I think this is high likely, but for now, I'm gonna say like D+6 or so, which is around what I'll say for Virginia. Virginia, there's been some rumors about Youngkin running. I really don't think those hold. Um, for the most part, I think Youngkin's going to save himself for future endeavors, like running for Senate in a pretty massive long shot race. Isn't the best idea, because if you do that, if you win, you're senator, woohoo. But if you lose, you deal with the consequences of that, which is basically fading into irrelevancy. Plus, Tim Kaine won by 9 against a pretty strong Republican candidate, which I think it means that, I mean, obviously, him being Asian probably hurt him in some of these rural areas, like 86-14, 76-24. Um, but also, you do see that the new Trump coalition really isn't made for down ballot elections. Youngkin honestly probably did worse than Trump in some of these precincts in Loudoun County among minorities, so something to keep in mind. Is that could potentially be a problem for any Republican nominee for Virginia Senate. And Mark Warner is a much stronger candidate than Tim Kaine. Even so, Tim Kaine won by a lot. I do think this depends on the 2025 Virginia gubernatorial election and if Warner retires, but for now, I'd say high likely margin, 9 to 10%. And for the final likely margin, we have New Jersey. Cory Booker seems to be gaining prominence, and with it, not so great effects for him. Um, Personally, I've been debating whether to put this as likely or safe, but I will say even Andy Kim, a pretty strong nominee, it was narrowly likely. Curtis Boshaw wasn't the best candidate. If the New Jersey GOP puts up someone who can continue the Trump trends in like Northern Jersey, not completely reverse them, and still do good in suburban areas, which has kind of been saying that Boshaw didn't even improve on Trump's margin. Morris, it was an open Senate election, which no excuse, and he barely did better in Hunterdon. Um, But if the New Jersey GOP nominates someone competent there, I could see this race narrowly getting under 10%. This is a bit of a hot take, I will say, so don't hold me to it. But especially the way the New Jersey GOP is heading in a pretty good direction, I'd say that this probably ends up narrowly under 10%. Um, it for the likely margins for Democrats and the likely margins overall, which means we have one, two, three, four, 5 Senate races that will be under 5%. These will not decide Senate control, but whoever wins a majority of these seats, net seats, unless Democrats win 3 of them and then they hold even. You have Democratic incumbents in Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, Republican incumbents in Maine and North Carolina. No other incumbents were defeated so far, so let's get into them. And I think we'll start in Maine. There are some warning signs for Susan Collins. One poll from PPP had her approval at like 15%, though that's kind of normal for Susan Collins. And a lot of it was Republicans disapproving of her. I think at the end of the day, they'll go out and vote for her. I mean, she didn't even endorse Trump in 2020, and they still got out and voted for her. You do have no presidential election on the ballot, which could hurt her among Republicans, turnout wise. But even though Maine didn't move that much Republican, which is really the only reason why I think that this race um, is in jeopardy for Republicans, you probably do see her do better among the Portland suburbanites, the Democratic voters along the coast, and she's shown some strength in retaining Republican voters up north. I think if she can get relatively good turnout in the second district, perhaps improve upon Trump's performance here by like 1 to 2 points. A little bit more if she wants to be safe. But like, you know, pick off a few of these rural townships that voted narrowly for Harris, run it up a bit more among the coastal areas and some of the cities, narrow them. Like Bangor, you probably don't want to lose that by 20. But for the most part, make up most of your improvement in the first district by doing a lot better in these coastal areas. And since the first district is much higher turnout, um, than the second district, if you had relatively even turnout between the two, Maine would be a 5 point win rather than a 7 point win. But that probably helps her, especially in an off year. I think that she's narrowly favored as of now. I'm sounding the alarm on this race, though. This race definitely can go Democrat if Democrats nominate a good nominee. And even though no one really seems willing to take on Susan Collins, that's either because they've already had their nominee, lined up for a while. I don't know who that would be. Probably not Janet Mills. But if it is, surprise, lean Republican. But if it's not, then that's a bad sign. Or it could be that the internals are terrible for Democrats, and I could be wrong, and I could have egg on my face, and ha ha ha, Tester was wrong. Who knows? Um, I've never been wrong before, so I don't know what that feels like. I'm kidding. People are gonna take that out of context. But I suppose we'll do New Hampshire next. This race became somewhat competitive when Jean Sheen announced her retirement. She was a pretty big face of the New Hampshire Democrats. She won in 2008, and ever since, her margin of victory has continued to expand. This was a pretty narrow Harris state, much narrower than a state like Maryland, Montana, um, Hawaii, where governors have tried to make their runs for Senate and kind of gave it away. Chris Sununu is rumored to have changed his mind, um, and now wants to run for Senate. I don't know how true that is. I think if he runs, he could put up a hell of a fight. The problem is Democrats do have a pretty good recruit. By the time this video comes out, it probably should be announced, but Chris Pappas more than likely is going to be filing for Senate. He's a pretty big overperformer. Even though most of the shift in New Hampshire was from the second district, this district still was like Harris plus 2 or so, and he won by 8. Republicans didn't have a great nominee, but at the same time, that's no excuse. He's a pretty big overperformer and could give Sununu a run for his money. Um, I think in that matchup, Pappas would be narrowly favored, but I don't think Sununu running is guaranteed. So for now, I'll be safe. I'll average like a high lean D if Sununu doesn't run on a pretty low tilt D if Sununu does run, and put it as lean Democrat for now. For now, if Sununu runs, completely different ball game. If Pappas tomorrow's announcement announces I will not be running for Senate, different ball game. But for now, I'm gonna say the wave drags Sununu under, and it's like a Democrat environment. Plus, New Hampshire hates incumbents and is significantly more Democrat in off-year elections. Like, look at this. This race, massive Republican overperformance. We nearly won by 10. Um, that's like 5 points worse than the 2022 gubernatorial election, which we were expected to win by like 25. So off year is pretty terrible for New Hampshire Republicans. Match that with anti-incumbency, and it's not a good formula for Republicans. Um, but we move on to North Carolina here. This race could get ugly um, for the incumbent Tom Tillis. Once again, a pretty narrow Trump state. We have a minor blue wave, and it definitely begins to vote Democrat in that. Plus, I do think Roy Cooper could do better these rural areas, and especially these kind of rural, kind of suburban areas between Greensboro and Charlotte, where most of the Republican margin in the state comes from. I also think he could do relatively well among black voters and suburbanites. I think part of his I think he's favored to win narrowly here. I think part of it is because of his personal appeal, but I think for the most part, Tom Tillis is dragged under just by the environment. I think Roy Cooper, he's not the best nominee, especially since he's going to be spending his time partying at Harvard for a little bit. Um, Not the best idea if you're going to run a Senate campaign. He also hasn't announced, and if it's, I don't even know who else Democrats have. Um, I think it's one of their former congressmen um, before they were Drawn out. So if that's the case, it's not going to go well. Um, but I'd say for now, Democrats are narrowly favored to pick off North Carolina, mostly because of the weight, but also because Roy Cooper probably is a good nominee. Um, I'd expect the margin to look a little bit like this, probably a little bit narrower, but you see the ancestrally Republican areas like Robeson, Scotland, Bladen get a little bit closer. Um, I don't know about the black area shifting Democrat like this. Probably just holding even. Some of these suburban areas going down. Um, Cabarrus, Alamance being big ones, and Republican margins between Greensboro and Charlotte going down a tiny bit. Um, you know, making it so that Republicans don't net enough votes here to overcome Democratic margins in the urban areas. Though I could definitely see it being closer to a they actually, well, they do have the Supreme Court race results closer to something like this, which we don't know the outcome of this race. It's April. Um, I will say it, it's a bit iffy. I would say the Democrat candidate probably won, but there are some questions about a lot of the votes should have been thrown out when they weren't. So there probably will be a new election for here, though legal battles um constantly might make that a bit of a complication. But for now, tilt Democrat. Georgia, I mean, this depends on if Kemp runs. I think if Kemp doesn't run, Ossoff should be fine. He's not the best candidate. Um, I do think a lot of his appeal was, wow, congrats on being in the right place at the right time. If you want to see what happens when you're not at the right place in the right time, look at the 2017 Georgia's sixth, I think, special election. Ask the Democrat candidate how he did there. You'll see some familiar names there, if I'm not mistaken. But Georgia, it's a complex state. Republicans might be screwed long term if these southern suburban trends carry over to the northern suburbs, but I think Kemp would have relatively good appeal there. Probably at least hold Trump's margins in these rural areas. Perhaps do better, and especially since a lot of the Georgia Democratic base relies on black voters, who probably won't turn out that much in a midterm. It could complicate things. After all, Raphael Warnock won in the first round. We're not going to factor in the second round because that was a lot of Republican demoralization. I'll talk about a runoff later. But he won in the first round by 1%, less than 1% actually, over Herschel Walker. And also Ossoff is a much weaker candidate than Raphael Warnock, so that's something to keep in mind. And I think if this goes to a runoff, it could potentially hurt Republicans. I think the idea that runoffs just hurt Republicans unilaterally is a little bit short-sighted. I think that 2020 was a special circumstance. Republicans just refused to turn out. Um, they were told not to turn out by a lot of people. Mitch McConnell, also with the stimulus checks, kind of screwed us over. But I do think that that's probably not the best example. In 2022, it was Herschel Walker, and Republicans were extremely demoralized after the midterms. Plus, also, you have seen a lot of Democratic turnout machines in Georgia begin to falter a little bit. You don't have a runoff for any positions in Georgia this time around. You actually haven't had a runoff besides for Senate in a long time. So we can't fully tell with that, but I'd say unless black turnout is high, a runoff probably helps Kemp, especially since this probably isn't the most impressive performance for Democrats. So I would still say for now, with Kemp as the nominee, probably at least matching Trump's performance in the rural areas, if not exceeding it, and black turnout being down, suburban areas probably on pace to win by 2 to 3%. We move on to Michigan. Without Pete Buttigieg running, I don't think anyone considers this Democrat or consider. Oh my god! It's just like up shit's paddle without a creek. That's a great quote, by the way. It's from yours truly. But yeah, in case you couldn't tell, I can't speak properly sometimes. Um, but no one really expects this to go Republican. Even I thought that Pete Buttigieg would win it, if you were the nominee. But without him as the nominee, you don't have the carpetbagging things, dragging him down. Plus, the Michigan Democrats are pretty good. The Michigan GOP is also somewhat skilled, but we also have to see if that was just Donald Trump. Um, if you want to use this as evidence for this, okay, but I would say for the most part, I do think Democrats take back a little bit of rural support from Republicans, do a little bit better among Oakland, Kent. I think this coalition is more suburban from now on. Probably flip Grand Traverse, do a little bit better in some of these coastal areas around Leland now. Um, shifting Democrat, and they get a slight turnout edge compared to the Republican areas in areas like Wayne, Oakland. Not Wayne, but Washington, Oakland, even places like Genesee. And while I think the governor's race will be more interesting with a third party on the ballot, I do think Democrats win Michigan Senate by 1 to 2% at this point. So, not tilt, lean Democrats. So, the Senate continues to remain the same partisanship. We do have two races that are lead Democrats, so those could potentially be competitive. The year doesn't look that great for Democrats. Georgia's lean Republican. Of course, that's with Kemp running. Without Kemp, I'd say it's probably tilt to lean Democrat. But even if Kemp runs, the year gets drastically worse for Republicans. I could see an argument for Ossoff being the favorite there, but North Carolina and Maine are the real competitive states, and these two will determine whether Democrats net gain, Republicans net gain, or the Senate remains 53-47. I'm going to side with the third of those three options. But anyways, thank you for watching. I'm a little bit out of breath because I've been talking for a lot. This wasn't my first take. Oh my god, I recorded for like 30 minutes. Um, all of it was gone. So if I was a little bit incoherent, um, that's why. But thank you for watching. Um, hopefully I'm not mixing up the two different recordings in my head while doing it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I already mentioned this when that was, an hour ago when I recorded the first take, and then I just like leave something, uh, just like verbal cacophony of words coming out of my mouth, just like have no context whatsoever for the things I'm saying, where it makes sense to me, but like to someone who has a brain, um, and to someone who can't read my mind, doesn't make sense. My apologies if that's the case. Hopefully tomorrow's video will be better. Um, but anyway, subscribe if you are new. Helps out the channel a bunch. There's gonna be a lot of new things, especially after the Wisconsin elections, which was a big milestone for the channel. We will be now moving on to some foreign politics, especially the Canadian election, which will be on the 28th, and the UK local elections, which will be May 1st, not April 1st. So big things there, but also big changes to the channel as a whole, and my strategy and goals for this channel, which will be discussed at a later date. So if you want to subscribe for more predictions like this, or to join me in the journey, would be greatly appreciated. We are very close to 2.1 thousand subscribers. Every 100 subscribers is a big milestone to me, at least, because it's a pretty deeply humbling feeling to see that so many people have tuned in to watch me rant about politics like a complete idiot for what now 40-45 minutes straight. But thank you for the support that you've shown me. Even if you're not subscribing, if this is the first time you're watching my videos, even if you skip to the end, you're still supporting me by giving me a view and by even clicking on the thumbnail because Lord knows it wasn't that visually attractive. So, anyways, thank you for watching. Godspeed. Testers done.